Hello, sixth graders. I'm here to give you a little video lesson for this week and next week, and we are moving into Unit 2. And Unit 2 starts with these early groups of people who settled in the Fertile Crescent. And so this week you're going to be looking at some of the Mesopotamian groups, and then this will also, next week, we'll continue with a look at Israel and some other groups. And so I put together a little video lesson for you to watch to help you with the lessons, as well as to help you do your quiz review handouts as you're working on them this week and next week. So we're going to start by obviously examining where is the Fertile Crescent, because that's obviously an important part of this lesson. And the Fertile Crescent is the green area on this map, and it stretches from the Tigris and the Euphrates River, which is right here in present-day Iraq, and then it stretches over towards, in a crescent shape, over towards the Mediterranean Sea, and it also includes the rivers, the Nile River that we would find in Egypt. These three areas are known as the Fertile Crescent because they were fertile, and that's why a lot of people wanted to settle there. There's obviously large rivers, the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Nile River, which provide fresh water. And even along the Mediterranean Sea, it's salt water, so it's not like you could drink it or use it, but it did have a good climate, and so they got rainwater there. So between the fresh water and the climates, this was an area where people could grow a lot of food. And we know from looking at our world geography in Unit 1 that geography and the environment play a really big role in development. And so that's why the people settled in the Fertile Crescent, was because of this fresh water and climate. And because of that, there's going to be lots of different groups that come in, and you'll see some of them here on the map. And there'll be others as well. Lots of people wanted to have their own land here. There were a lot of invaders, even some wars between these different groups, because they oftentimes were, trying to take land from each other that everybody wanted to use. So the very first of our groups of people that you're going to learn about this week are from Mesopotamia. And Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. And the two rivers are the Tigris and the Euphrates. And you'll see here on the map that these are the Sumerians. And the Sumerians were centered around city-states, and these were their city-states. One of their city-states was Ur, and this is a picture of the ziggurat that is in Ur that has been rebuilt. And it became a really important city-state for the Sumerian people, and they were able to grow food along the Tigris and the Euphrates River. It was very swampy for a long time in history, but eventually Ur was taken over by the desert, and a lot of the area today that was held by the Sumerians has become a lot drier than it was in the past. The Sumerians built a lot of their homes from reeds originally, but obviously with technology as it improved, they were able to build with mud bricks like the ziggurat. They also were able to grow a lot of different products. They were farmers, and they could grow a lot of different crops that allowed them to develop. They also grew some new products like dates, which became one of the fruits that the Sumerians found to be really important. And even today in the Middle East, dates are considered to be a really important food source. It's a very popular thing for people to eat in the Middle East. They also had their own religion. It was a polytheistic religion, so it had lots of different gods in it. One of them was Anu, who was the god of authority, and you can see the pictures down here show Anu. This is Anu here, and then again over on this side. Oops. I went too fast. Sorry. And they also believed in that religion of eternal life, and they wanted to, kind of develop this religion. They also believed through their religious practices that you could heal your body through a lot of different ways, and they used salt for that as well. The Sumerians also made a lot of advancements. They made advancements in mathematics, and they made advancements in transportation, including wheels. They were the first people to invent the wheel. wheel, but they also utilized horses and chariots for their transportation. They also, of course, developed cuneiform. Cuneiform is a writing system, and you'll see there a picture of it down at the bottom. It kind of looks like hieroglyphics. It's very similar to Egyptian hieroglyphics, and the Egyptians were the first to develop writing, but the Sumerians also had their own form of writing, and they wrote it on these stone tablets. They also were able to do agriculture, as I discussed earlier, and they were able to do that by controlling the river flooding and then building canals and irrigation methods for their agriculture. So the Sumerians were the first of the Mesopotamian people that you'll learn about this week. The second one you'll learn about are the Babylonians. The Babylonians are from the same place as the Sumerians. They basically just took over for the Sumerians, and it was centered around the city-state of Babylon. And Babylon is in Iraq today. It would be in what we currently would call Iraq, and it's along the Euphrates rivers. And the most famous of the leaders of the Babylonians was King Hammurabi. And this is a picture of Hammurabi's code. It's written on a stone structure, and it is a legal code, and it's written in cuneiform, which the Sumerians had invented and the Babylonians continued to use. And Hammurabi's code was for everyone. It was an idea that we would all be covered by the same set of laws and punishments. So that was a really important part of early Babylonians. Babylonia was a very rich empire, very powerful for most of its time, and so they were able to really kind of develop other things as they had plenty of food for most of their time, and they didn't have to worry about too many people invading them for much of their history. So they started to develop other things. They looked at astrology. So you'll see here in these two examples that's sort of a mapping of the stars and the planets. And that would be the astronomy part. We all know what astronomy is. That's when we look up at the sky and we can see the stars and the planets. But the Babylonians also used astrology. That's where you look at it to try to predict the future, and you try to use it to try to explain things that are happening. And they used both of those types of sciences. One of the things the Babylonians are sort of famous for is obviously the city of Babylon. And in there, the idea that there was this large ziggurat known as the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. It is considered one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, although historically we really aren't sure that it actually ever happened. Nobody's really, this is a picture, like a painting that someone has done of what they think the Hanging Gardens of Babylon looked like, but nobody's really sure. So it could be entirely a myth, but you can see here on the map, here is the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This is what we would call Iraq today. Here's Ur. Remember, that's the city-state of the Sumerians. Here's Babylon. It was literally like right up the river from Ur, and the Babylonians took over the area of the Sumerians, and then they expanded it up and over into what today we call the Fertile Crescent, this area right through here, which is today Iraq and Syria and a little bit of Jordan, and then into Israel and Lebanon. So that's the Babylonians. The third group that you're going to read a little bit about this week are known as the Assyrians. And you'll notice on their map, it's basically exactly the same. So here was Sumerians, here were the Babylonians, and now the Assyrians were up here at Nineveh. But they basically conquered the same amount of land. One group just kind of comes right after the next, and they all sort of merge together. The Assyrians were known as a more warrior type than the Sumerians and the Babylonians, and the Assyrians not only had the horses that Babylonians used for chariots, but they also bred them and sold them and used them in war. And they also started to develop a larger wooden structures, ships and other things out of wood, and they got a lot of that wood from Lebanon. And Lebanon today is right over here along the Mediterranean Sea, and it's known for its hardwood as well as its cedar. And this is actually the flag, the current flag of the country of Lebanon. And you'll notice that it has a cedar tree in the middle of its flag. And the reason for that is because Lebanon became so well known for being an area of trees, and that wood was then used for lots of structures and ships by a lot of different groups of people, including the Phoenicians and the Assyrians. The last of the groups, and you're going to read more about these guys next week, in your lessons that are coming up, but they're kind of obviously all part of the Fertile Crescent, so I'm going to include them in our lesson overview, are the Hebrews. And the Hebrews are an ancient group of people who also are from the Fertile Crescent. They actually started in the Mesopotamian area and then moved and settled into what today we call Israel. Back then it wasn't called Israel, it was called Canaan. And you'll notice here on the map that there are a number of places that are really important in this land. There's the Mediterranean Sea, which obviously is important for trade, but there's this large area of coastal plain where most of the people are going to want to settle, where the climate is nice. They also have a large desert called the Negev Desert down here in the south. So most of this area was way too hot in the southern part of Canaan, and so most people did not settle down here. And then there's this body of water here called the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea is an area where it's not water you can use for irrigation because it's extremely salty. And because of that, they could mine for salt. Israel doesn't have a lot of resources. It does not have oil. It doesn't have a lot of other minerals, but they do have salt and they do have gypsum. And then other than that, they could use their coastal plains for the growing of food. And so the Hebrews, the ancient Hebrews, came to settle in this area. The story of the ancient Hebrews really starts back with a man named Abraham. And you can see on this map, Abraham actually was from over here where our Sumerians and Babylonians and Assyrians were from. And then he traveled through the Fertile Crescent and came here with his extended family, his sons and grandsons, etc., that came after him. And then those people became known as the Hebrews, and they settled here in what was known as Canaan. The Hebrews eventually ended up going to Egypt, and they lived in Egypt for a while, and then they left Egypt, and then they came back to Canaan. That was known as the Exodus, and that was led by a man named Moses, who became really important in the history of the Hebrew people and of this time period. Moses became important because he was considered the father of these ancient Hebrew people as he led them out of Egypt and back to settle in the same Fertile Crescent area as we've been talking about with these other people. He was also important because Moses is known as the father of the Mosaic Code. And the Mosaic Code became the background for three major religions that developed. Most people commonly call the Mosaic Code the Ten Commandments, but it was this idea that there was a set of religious law, moral tradition that could not be changed by anyone. And that moral tradition became the basis of the Jewish faith, the Christian faith, and the Islamic faith over time, over hundreds of years. And so that's the role that Moses played as well. Once all of these Hebrews resettled over hundreds of years, it became a more unified area. And so there was a number of kings that played a role. One was Saul. He actually unified all of the Hebrew people and made it into what we call the Kingdom of Israel, which was this blue area here on the map. And then King David expanded it. Then King Solomon expanded it even larger. And so this area of Israel, what became Israel, was established by these Hebrew people. After Solomon died, however, the kingdom of Israel became divided, and that it split into Israel and Judah. And this is going to kind of fit in with the history of some of the other religions that are going to develop in this part of the world. This region of Palestine then became home to three real large religions that continue to play a really big role in Israel today. And that was the Christian people who developed also during this time period of Palestine. So it was called Canaan, then it was called the Kingdom of Israel, and then this region became known as Palestine. And Palestine was where all these different groups of people came to live. Christianity grew out of the Jewish faith. The Old Testament of the Hebrew Bible was the Hebrew side of it, and then the New Testament sort of added the story of Christianity, and that then eventually the Islamic faith will grow independently of these two, and the three of them will coexist in Palestine.